The hearing room was electric with tension long before the first words were spoken. Bright television lights flooded the mahogany-paneled chamber, catching the polished brass nameplates of senators and glinting off the rows of cameras positioned like silent sentinels. At the center of it all stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her deep purple blazer vivid under the glare, her posture unyielding, her expression carved in steel. The hum of whispered speculation filled the air. Reporters scribbling, aides texting, senators shifting uneasily. It was supposed to be another procedural session, but everyone could sense it. Something far greater was about to unfold. Moments earlier, former Attorney General Bill Barr had delivered a statement that detonated like a grenade across the committee. Congresswoman Crockett's allegations, he'd declared in his deep, commanding voice, are complete fabrications. She is deliberately misleading the American people. The Republican side of the chamber erupted in approving applause, while Democratic senators exchanged uneasy glances. The words struck hard. An open challenge not just to Crockett's credibility, but to her entire political existence. Crockett didn't flinch. Her grip tightened around her tablet as she locked eyes with Barr, who sat at the witness table with the smug calm of a man who'd spent decades navigating Washington's storms. His half-smile carried the quiet arrogance of establishment power, the belief that experience and seniority would always outweigh truth and preparation. What Barr didn't yet realize was that Crockett had come ready for war. Hidden among her neatly organized notes was evidence that could end his storied career in a single afternoon. As the committee chairman began to move on, Crockett's clear voice cut through the room. "Mr. Chairman," she said, standing tall, "I request time to respond to these serious allegations against my character." The room fell silent. The chairman hesitated before nodding. All eyes turned to her. "This isn't about character," she began steadily, stepping toward the microphone. "It's about truth, and whether it still matters in this chamber." The calm in her tone masked the storm that was gathering beneath. This was no longer just a congressional hearing. It was about to become the most explosive confrontation Washington had seen in years. At the witness table, Barr, 74 and dressed in his signature dark blue suit, adjusted his glasses. He exuded the familiar air of institutional gravitas that had defined his career. Twice a U.S. Attorney General, legal advisor to presidents, celebrated speaker at conservative think tanks. Barr had long mastered the art of commanding respect. "Thank you for having me here today," he began earlier, his tone almost professorial. "I'm here to set the record straight regarding the Department of Justice's actions during my tenure." His allies on the committee nodded approvingly. Across the room, Crockett sat silently, her eyes fixed on him. Though newer to Washington, she was no stranger to confrontation. A former civil rights attorney from Dallas, she'd built her career on methodical preparation and fearless advocacy. Her path from courtroom battles in Texas to the marble corridors of Congress had been improbable, but not accidental. In less than 3 years, she had become one of the most dynamic Democratic voices in the House. Articulate, relentless, and unwilling to bend to power. 3 weeks before the hearing, Crockett had publicly accused Barr of misleading Congress about a Justice Department investigation during his time in office. "I believe former Attorney General Barr concealed critical information from Congress and may have committed perjury," she said. During a live interview, a statement that ignited a political firestorm and led to this joint Senate-House hearing. Conservative media mocked her as reckless. Liberal commentators warned she'd picked a fight too big for her. But Crockett had evidence. Evidence she hadn't yet shown anyone outside her tight inner circle. Barr cleared his throat before turning his remarks directly toward her. "Congresswoman Crockett's accusations are not just misleading," he said sharply. "They're completely fabricated. I've served this nation for decades. Meanwhile, she's been in Congress barely long enough to find the cafeteria." Laughter rippled across the Republican side. Cameras captured every smirk and sneer. "She claims to have evidence. She doesn't. She claims I misled this body. I did not." These are the tactics of someone chasing headlines rather than truth. The stakes were enormous. If Barr was right, Crockett's credibility, and perhaps her political future, would collapse overnight. But if she could prove her case, Barr would face the unthinkable: public disgrace and possible criminal exposure for lying under oath. As the chairman recognized her for questioning, Crockett rose. The sound of her heels echoed sharply against the marble floor as she walked toward the microphone. "Mr. Barr," she began, her voice controlled but firm, "thank you for appearing today." The tension in the room thickened. Senators leaned forward. The cameras zoomed in. "I'd like to revisit your testimony from June 18, 2022, she said, glancing down at her tablet. "You stated under oath that you had no knowledge of the Jefferson County investigation until after the Washington Post broke the story. Is that still your testimony today?" "That's correct," Barr said smoothly, his tone unwavering. "I first learned of it from the media. I then requested a briefing from my staff." "And you testified that no communications about that investigation ever reached your office prior to that reporting?" "That's right," Barr repeated. "Any suggestion otherwise is false." Crockett nodded slowly, typing something on her screen. "Thank you. Now, Mr. Barr, are you familiar with the Justice Department communication protocol known as EAGLES?" For the first time, a flicker of discomfort crossed Barr's face. "It's one of several internal systems used for secure updates," he said cautiously. "And what kind of information is transmitted through EAGLES?" she pressed. "It's used for highly sensitive matters, primarily to keep leadership informed." "And would such notifications reach the Attorney General's office if the investigation involved elected officials?" "Potentially," Barr admitted, "but my staff would typically review them first." The chamber had gone utterly silent. Reporters froze mid-scribble. Even the chairman leaned forward, realizing the direction of her line of questioning. "Mr. Barr," Crockett said quietly, "did you or your office receive any EAGLES notifications about the Jefferson County investigation prior to the Washington Post article?" Barr straightened his posture. "No," he said firmly. "None whatsoever." Crockett inhaled slowly, then looked toward the clerk. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record a document marked Exhibit C." She handed a folder to the clerk. "This is an EAGLES notification dated March 4, 2022, 3 months before the Post story, addressed directly to Attorney General William Barr regarding the Jefferson County investigation." The room erupted in murmurs. Senators flipped through pages as Barr scanned his copy, color draining slightly from his cheeks. "Additionally," Crockett continued, her voice rising just enough to command the room, "I have Exhibit D, an internal email from your Chief of Staff acknowledging receipt of that notification and confirming that you were personally briefed." The chairman's gavel struck repeatedly. "Order! The committee will come to order." When silence returned, he looked toward Barr. "The witness may respond." Barr adjusted his glasses again, visibly rattled. These documents, without authentication, prove nothing. Anyone could have drafted them. This is a political stunt. "Altered documents?" Crockett asked, arching an eyebrow. "That's a serious charge, Mr. Barr." "No more serious than accusing a former Attorney General of lying under oath," Barr shot back. Democratic members stirred uneasily while the ranking member interjected. "Mr. Chairman, these documents appear to bear Justice Department tracking codes and security markings." Barr's response was curt. "Appearances can deceive. In my experience, the Congresswoman is attempting a political assassination using incomplete or falsified materials." Crockett's calm returned, her words deliberate. "Mr. Barr, would you be surprised to learn that former Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monroe has signed an affidavit confirming the authenticity of these documents?" That name landed like a thunderclap. Lisa Monroe, a respected bipartisan figure known for integrity, had served directly beneath Barr. He froze, then spoke carefully. "I'd need to review such an affidavit." "Of course," Crockett said smoothly. "Exhibit E." Another folder passed through the hands of aides to senators, who now studied the papers with growing unease. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. What began as Barr's confident defense was unraveling, thread by thread. "Furthermore," Crockett continued, "Exhibit F contains metadata verification from the Department of Justice's own IT division confirming authenticity and unbroken chain of custody for these files. Barr now leaned in toward his counsel, whispering urgently. His jaw clenched, his hand trembled faintly as he flipped through the pages. The chairman sighed heavily. Given the significance of these materials, this committee will recess for 15 minutes. The gavel came down. Mr. Barr, I suggest you confer with your counsel. Chaos erupted instantly. Reporters dashed for the exits, phones pressed to their ears. Staffers huddled in frantic discussions, and the gallery buzzed with disbelief. Through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat motionless at the witness table, her notes perfectly aligned before her, her expression unreadable. She'd just turned the entire hearing on its head, and she knew it. In the hallway, journalists swarmed senators emerging from the chamber. These documents appear credible, admitted one Republican senator reluctantly. If authenticated, they could contradict the former Attorney General's sworn testimony. When the hearing resumed, the air was entirely different. Barr returned flanked by 2 additional attorneys, his confidence replaced with visible caution. The chairman cleared his throat. This committee has confirmed with the Justice Department that the identification numbers on these exhibits match their internal records. We will proceed under the assumption that these are authentic government communications. Barr leaned forward to his microphone, his voice subdued. Mr. Chairman, after reviewing the documents and consulting with counsel, I'd like to clarify my earlier testimony. The room erupted again. Senators whispered urgently. Cameras zoomed in. Barr's carefully constructed armor was cracking in real time. It appears there may have been notifications that reached my office, he continued. However, I maintain that I was not adequately briefed on their content or significance. Crockett seized the opening immediately. So, Mr. Barr, you're now revising your sworn testimony. From no knowledge of the investigation to limited awareness? I'm clarifying, Barr replied sharply. Crockett nodded, the faintest smile touching her lips. Very well. Then I'd like to present one final exhibit for now. Exhibit G. As aides distributed copies, the chairman's eyes widened as he skimmed the first page. Crockett looked directly into the cameras. This is a transcript of a meeting between Mr. Barr and 5 senior Justice Department officials dated April 12, 2022, 2 months before he testified that he knew nothing about the Jefferson County investigation. The room erupted in chaos. Once more, senators whispering, journalists typing furiously, aides rushing to confirm details. The gavel slammed again. Order! Shouted the chairman. When quiet finally returned, Crockett lifted her voice. Steady, precise, devastating. In this transcript, Mr. Barr is recorded saying, quote, I've reviewed the Jefferson file. This investigation stays compartmentalized. No communication with oversight committees. I'll handle inquiries personally. A silence heavier than any gavel fell across the room. Barr's eyes dropped to the table, his face pale. Crockett stood motionless, the embodiment of calm authority. Mr. Barr, she said softly, this transcript doesn't just contradict your earlier testimony. It reveals deliberate intent to conceal information from Congress. For a long, unbearable moment, Barr said nothing. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he turned to the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I need to consult with my counsel regarding potential Fifth Amendment considerations before proceeding. The gasps that followed were immediate and unanimous. A former Attorney General invoking the Fifth Amendment in a live televised congressional hearing. It was unprecedented. The chairman looked stricken. The witness has the right to consult counsel, he said solemnly. But let the record reflect. This is an extraordinary and deeply concerning development. And as cameras flashed across the chamber, Jasmine Crockett sat back, her face composed, her mission complete. For now, the hearing was far from over, but everyone in that room knew the balance of power had shifted. The apprentice had just cornered the master. The tension in the Senate hearing room had grown unbearable. Cameras whirred, pens scratched, and the faint hum of whispers filled the chamber. Jasmine Crockett stood motionless, staring at Bill Barr across the long mahogany table as if weighing every lie, every deflection that had just been spoken. Her heart pounded, not out of fear but conviction. She had come here knowing this moment would define her. "Mr. Barr," she began, her tone calm but sharpened like a blade. "You can mock my words, you can question my motives, but you will not rewrite history to suit your comfort." The Republican senators shifted uneasily as she continued. "I did not fabricate evidence. I did not invent the names of women who vanished under the watch of men your department chose not to investigate. And I will not sit here and be told that seeking truth is a political stunt." Barr's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the chairwoman as if expecting her to intervene, but Crockett didn't stop. "You said I misled the American people," she pressed. "But you're the same man who stood before cameras in 2020 and told this nation that there was no systemic issue with justice, while communities across this country burned in grief. You buried reports, dismissed investigations, and called accountability an inconvenience." The room rippled with low murmurs. One of the Republican aides tried to hand Barr a folder, but he waved it off. "Congresswoman, I understand your passion," Barr replied, his tone clipped. "But you're operating on speculation, not facts. You're peddling outrage instead of evidence." Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady but laced with steel. "Evidence?" she said, almost whispering. "Let's talk about evidence." She motioned to her aide, who placed a thick binder on the table. "These are internal memos, signed, dated, and verified, showing that your office dismissed federal referrals connected to Jeffrey Epstein's network in 2018. You claimed jurisdictional limits. Yet 2 of those same case numbers were reopened this year after whistleblower testimony. The silence that followed was suffocating. Barr's face hardened. "Those documents are classified," he said curtly. "Not anymore," Crockett countered. "The Oversight Committee declassified them this morning." Her words hit like a gavel strike. The crowd gasped, cameras zoomed in, and a producer in the back shouted something into an earpiece. Barr shifted uncomfortably. "You're trying to put on a show, Congresswoman," he said. "You want headlines, not truth." Crockett took a slow breath, then spoke softly. "The truth doesn't need a headline, Mr. Barr. It just needs daylight." The chairwoman banged the gavel. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But the noise didn't subside. Journalists were already typing, aides whispering, senators exchanging looks. Crockett turned slightly toward the cameras. "Let me be clear," she said. "This isn't about me. This is about every woman whose case was ignored because it was inconvenient. About every report buried because it threatened power. And it's about a justice system that has protected the privileged for too long." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "You can call me emotional. You can call me partisan. But what you can't call me is silent." Barr's composure finally cracked. "You're grandstanding," he shouted. "You think this performance changes anything? You think moral outrage replaces evidence?" Crockett met his gaze without flinching. "No, Mr. Barr. I think moral silence destroys nations." The audience erupted. The chairwoman's gavel pounded again, but the energy in the room was uncontrollable. Reporters rushed to the hallway to call their editors. On social media, clips of Crockett's rebuttal began to circulate within minutes. The words, "moral silence destroys nations," were already trending. Barr tried to gather his papers, but his hands trembled slightly. "You'll regret politicizing this," he said under his breath. Crockett didn't look away. "I don't regret fighting for truth." She leaned forward one last time. "But you might regret underestimating it." As Barr stood to leave, a voice from the press section shouted, "Congresswoman, do you plan to pursue charges?" She paused at the podium, eyes glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. "What I plan," she said, "is to make sure no one hides behind titles again. Not in my committee. Not in this country." The gavel struck one final time. The hearing was adjourned, but the reckoning had only begun. Outside the chamber, cameras swarmed Crockett as she exited into the marble hallway. Her staff followed close behind, clutching folders and phones buzzing with messages. Reporters surrounded her, shouting questions about subpoenas and investigations. Crockett stopped, turned to face them, and spoke clearly into the sea of microphones. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about responsibility. If we can't hold our leaders accountable, then democracy becomes theater. And I'm not here to play a role. I'm here to tell the truth." As the crowd erupted with flashes and questions, Crockett walked away, unflinching, unwavering, and unapologetically determined. The echo of her heels down the marble corridor felt like a drumbeat of defiance. By the time she reached the exit, America was already watching, debating, and reeling. For some, she was a hero. For others, a threat. But for everyone who witnessed it, there was no mistaking it. Jasmine Crockett had just changed the conversation.